Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely massive geopolitical domino effect. We're talking about how a single, pointed political feud can literally trigger a chain reaction around the globe. We're going to trace this incredibly complex, interconnected web between the US, Germany, and Iran, and look at how words spoken in a political theater can instantly move thousands of troops and drastically escalate the threat of bunker-busting military action. Right, so it all kicked off with a single political spark. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz actually came out and declared Iran was humiliating America in the Middle East. Now, in the world of international diplomacy, words obviously carry a ton of weight. But a public statement like this, it's basically throwing a match onto dry kindling. This exact comment is the catalyst that sparked the entire chain reaction we're breaking down for you today. Well, the immediate consequence of that feud was stark. As a direct response to those comments, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a very clear military directive. The U.S. would be withdrawing 5,000 American personnel from Germany over the following 6 to 12 months. So this wasn't just typical diplomatic grumbling. It was an actual physical shift of military power in direct response to political criticism. Section 1. Troop withdrawal by the numbers. Now, it's really fascinating to strip away the noise here and look at the objective data. Yes, 5,000 troops leaving sounds absolutely enormous to the general public. But when you put that into perspective, that's only about 14% of the total U.S. force based in Germany. A massive 86%, which is at least 36,000 troops, are staying exactly where they are. Plus, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about crucial infrastructure. The U.S. is keeping its absolute core assets in Germany. They're retaining the huge airbase at Ramstein, which is the backbone for global logistics. They're also keeping the headquarters for both the U.S. European Command and the African Command. That whole massive infrastructure setup is largely untouched. Let's zoom out even further for a second. 68,000. That is the sweeping total footprint of U.S. forces across Europe right now, spread out across about 12 different countries. So while losing 5,000 troops in Germany is definitely a political shockwave, the overarching U.S. security umbrella in Europe remains incredibly formidable. You really have to understand this scale to see the bigger picture of global security. You know, historical context is everything with this stuff. Force reductions, or even just the threat of them, actually have a pretty long precedent in Europe. Right after the Cold War ended, the UK withdrew the bulk of its forces from Germany over a decade. Then, during President Trump's first term, there was a threat to reduce the footprint by 10,000 troops, though that didn't end up happening. And now, we're looking at this 5,000 personnel departure scheduled for the next 6 to 12 months. Section 2. NATO and the Cold War legacy. The reality we've got to remember is that NATO's massive military posture in Europe, it's largely a hangover from the Cold War. These troop deployments, these sprawling bases, they were built for a world where the Soviet Union was an immediate next-door threat. Once that era finished, the global landscape changed entirely, which is exactly why allied nations, like the UK we just mentioned, previously pulled their forces back. So we're left with this fascinating paradox. Objectively, from a pure logistical and historical standpoint, gradually reducing a post-Cold War footprint actually makes complete logical sense. But subjectively, because this specific decision was delivered seemingly as a direct retaliation to political criticism, it's widely viewed as a punishment. And that subjective perception is exactly what damages NATO's unity and credibility. Section 3. The Iran nuclear flashpoint. To really grasp this whole geopolitical web, we have to connect that initial political spark in Germany back to its root cause, the rapidly deteriorating nuclear negotiations with Iran. The unfiltered truth of the situation is incredibly tense. President Trump delivered a strict ultimatum: no Iranian nuclear weapon, period. And if negotiations completely fail, his stated alternative is a return to direct military action. That is a very real, looming threat hanging over the entire region. And that brings us right to the Fordow facility in northern Iran. The tactical nightmare here isn't what's sitting above ground. It's that the really critical, sensitive nuclear assets are stored deep underground. You are dealing with a program literally buried into the earth, which completely changes the kind of military strategy you'd need to neutralize it. Section 4. Assessing Operation Midnight Hammer. To understand how the military actually plans for something like this, let's look back at an operation from mid-last year called Midnight Hammer. This was not your standard air patrol. It involved B-2 stealth bombers dropping staggering 20,000-pound bunker buster bombs. These things are specifically engineered to punch deep into the earth before detonating.
The raw, devastating scale of the weaponry required to reach those subterranean facilities is genuinely hard to wrap your head around.
Now, right after the dust settles on a strike like that, the job shifts from pilots to analysts, conducting a battle damage assessment, or BDA. Rather than just reading field reports, American and Israeli intelligence agencies meticulously pore over high-resolution satellite imagery. They're essentially measuring the brutal efficiency of the strikes, trying to figure out whether the targets deep in the earth were completely destroyed, just partially hit, or left entirely untouched. All of this feeds into a cold, highly calculated feedback loop. First, you have the initial B-2 bomber strikes on the facilities. Next, the agencies gather that battle damage assessment via satellite. And finally, they use that fresh intelligence to draft a brand new master target list. It's a deeply methodical process that directly lays the groundwork for the next wave of potential conflict, effectively drafting the blueprints for a Midnight Hammer 2. And man, if there's a Midnight Hammer 2, the stakes are just off the charts. To neutralize that newly updated target list, military analysts are suggesting the use of hypersonic missiles. We are talking about munitions traveling at such extreme speeds, they represent the absolute bleeding edge of modern warfare, and they're being proposed directly for these potential follow-up operations. Section 5. Unfinished business and next steps. Okay, so we've looked at the troop movements in Europe and the bunker busters in the Middle East. Where is this all leading? Well, current security analysis points to a deeply unsettling outcome. The quote here really hits the nail on the head. The lion's share of opinion still seems to be they'll walk away, but it'll leave behind a lot of loose ends. Despite all the massive military posturing and troop reallocations, the most likely outcome might simply be a completely unresolved standoff. Which leaves us with a massive question to ponder. What happens to global security when military force simply walks away from a fractured landscape, leaving behind the loose ends of an active nuclear threat and internally divided alliances? When the dust finally settles, the political feuds and military repositioning don't just magically disappear. They permanently reshape the world we live in. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we keep breaking down the complex realities of our global landscape.